So kind of go over to gossip. This this one isn't as very polished a GUI as the other ones. Oh, don't even know if it's there. It is. Uh, we kind of have some work to redesign this and make it a little cleaner, but we figured we'd just throw it in at the moment because why not? So this is a live
Yeah.
view of the gossip information from the validator. So this is really just a table of the pub keys, kind of the stake, if the node's delinquent, and some info about the last vote. Yeah, this again, not quite as much love as the other parts of the GUI, but we had it available, so we kind of threw it in as a little bonus. But at
Sure.
some point, we'll be doing a really nice redesign of this too.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think this has been a super helpful overview of what's currently available today. Is there anything we talked at the beginning about maybe going into, you said the coming soon part? Did you want to
So
touch
there,
on that?
so there is one other thing that's available now in v0.5 we can go into first, which is this. I hope it's on this. Oh yeah, just takes a minute to
Yep.
office Wi-Fi is terrible, which is this kind of view here. So yeah, we can talk about this if you like.
Yeah, let's go through this.
Okay. Yeah, so I mentioned there were these two questions that we've really been trying to answer a lot, at least on the leader side of the validator, which is why did I skip my slot? And then the other one is why was my block not full?
Yep.
So for the skip question, we kind of talked through that. We have these indicators and you can try and go figure it out. But why is my block not full? That was still kind of a hard question to answer. So we've actually built some tooling into the GUI here that can help you answer that. Originally, it was kind of just for the development team, but we're shipping it. I think it's useful for the community to see things like this and to understand the blocks also. So we'll actually pick one. The what I typically do here is like find a block that we didn't fill. Here there was a very recent one. This slot 7180 was 87% full. So we can actually come into the overview here, and in the waterfall, if we select that slot, it'll load this new chart in v0.5, which we're calling the slot progression. And what this is showing is the validator's progress throughout packing that individual block for that slot. So again, we had a limit of 50 million CUs and we've only put 43 million in it. So we can kind of start to come in and look at what happened. And just to explain this chart, it's a little busy, so the context is helpful. There's this blue line, which is maybe the most important one. This is the compute units that have been packed so far. So we start at 0, the block is empty, and we're progressing through the slot here up until 400 milliseconds, which is how long we get to pack. And so you want to see this blue line kind of come and hit 50 million. So we fell a little short. These other two lines are showing the total tips and priority fees we've earned as the block progresses. They're very spiky. You can see almost, as we talked about earlier, almost all of the tips and fees are coming from like just a few transactions.
Right.
For the most part, like here, we've spent a lot of compute units and earned, some fees, but not very many compared to the rest of the transactions. And finally, there's this yellow bar, which is how many CPU cores are executing transactions at the moment. So here's where things get interesting. We have said we have these bank tiles, which are the things that execute transactions when we're leader. And here our system has 4 of them. So there's 4 CPU cores dedicated to this job. If you kind of click into see how busy these CPU cores, only one of them was busy the entire time. And you'll kind of be like, well, if we weren't able to fill the block, why didn't we use the other CPU cores? And here, the second CPU core running bank number 2 is only 40% busy. It actually is only busy during the second half of the slot. And these third and fourth banks are really only activated right towards the end. This is part of our scheduling strategy for Firedancer and Firedancer. What we're trying to optimize for is revenue. So we want to maximize the amount of fees that you're earning in your leader blocks, not necessarily the compute units. Now, if you have space left at the end of the block and you put additional transactions in there, you're necessarily going to earn more fees because all transactions pay a positive amount of fees. But there's a lot of considerations we're kind of taking into account when we're doing scheduling. So this chart is kind of reflecting some of those considerations. One of the considerations is you don't want to just pack everything you get immediately. If we scheduled as fast as we could from all of the transactions in our buffer, we would probably finish our blocks at about 100, 140 millisecond point. But if you received a bunch of really lucrative transactions, let's say at the 200 or 300 millisecond point of your slot, you wouldn't be able to pack them. So there's kind of this trade-off between executing fast and being able to get all your compute units, but maybe not being able to put valuable transactions in later, and executing slowly and leaving space towards the end of the block for valuable transactions that arrive, but maybe risking not filling the block and being under on compute units. And so when we're under on compute units like this, it's usually an intentional choice by the scheduler to kind of run a little behind. And so here what you're seeing, this green line represents the point at which we will use one CPU core. So if our compute units ever falls in this top part of the chart, we will turn all the CPU cores off and not execute anything. And if the compute units falls in this green part of the chart with the green background, we'll only use one CPU core because we're kind of on target. And you'll see in this slot, we fell a little off target. We were supposed to be in this green. We're falling further and further behind. It doesn't look like the blue line is going to hit 48 million. We start activating more and more CPU cores. So here we're using 2 CPU cores. You can see the yellow line kind of springs up and active banks is going to 2. And as we get really late in the slot, we realize, oh, we're pretty far behind. We start turning on these emergency CPU cores to really push you up right towards the end. So here we've done a really good job, like right at the end of getting from 30 to 43 relatively quickly in about, what is that, 40 milliseconds.
Yep.
So we've done a lot of the work of the slot just on 4 CPU cores here right at the end. And this is, again, kind of an explicit choice to capture all the value at the end because that's when we can rank, we have the best opportunities to choose from. We've seen everything arrive. So in this case, we fell a little short, but the revenue of the validator ends up being much higher if we follow this strategy and occasionally fall short than kind of try and guarantee and, end blocks a little too early. If we look at some of the other blocks that were actually full, like this one here, you can see, again, similar kind of thing happening. We waited till pretty late, and here we're able to catch 50 million. So we turned on 4 CPU cores right towards the end.
It looks like here, what is this middle line? It's a little small for me to see. Is that the tips? The one that shoots up fast at the beginning?
Yeah, this is tips. Yeah, so someone sent us a really lucrative bundle right at the start. You can see with the tips, they kind of come in about every 50 milliseconds. That's the frequency of the Jito auctions.
Yeah.
And the priority fees are a little different. There'll be some periods where, we get a bunch of lucrative priority fee transactions and other periods where it's just a slow, gradual rise. I'll try and find a really good slot just so we can see what something looks like if it really stays on target. Again, a lot of these are kind of falling behind, and that can just be a regime that the network gets into. So here you can see really why we take this strategy. If you look at this, almost all the priority, a huge amount of priority fees have come in right at the end of the slot. And we've luckily been able to capture them really well for this validator because we've saved a fair amount of compute units.
So what's the decision logic, I guess? So for example, at the beginning, you're choosing not to pack everything you're getting.
Yeah.
Like what's the decision logic that says, okay, this block essentially, or this should be packed, essentially. This transaction should be packed.
So we set these target compute unit values throughout the slot. So that's kind of what these lines are showing.
Okay.
So these diagonal lines are deciding how many CPU cores to execute with. So That really is the logic. If the compute units is falling inside this green background, we're executing only with one CPU core because we kind of want to do so lazily. And you can see as we get further and further over into this bottom right area, this here is where we'll use 4 CPU cores. So that's how it's shooting up right at the end. Is it's realized it's gotten late and needs to use 4 CPU cores. These lines are just set based on a formula we kind of modeled out internally for how fast we think we can execute and kind of how quickly we want to catch up at the end and so on. The interesting thing here, I think, is people always ask us, well, should I add a bunch of more bank tiles? And the answer, if you look at this, is kind of like, well, not really, right? It doesn't benefit you that much. For the most part, we're never going to use them anyway, except maybe in certain rare cases, right towards the end, if you had 6, we would be able to use them to catch up a little quicker at the end here. But it's
so is there, you know, at the beginning, is there a transaction, for example, at the beginning that you might not pack, but if you received it later, you would pack? I don't know if that's the best way for me to form my question. But like, I guess you're waiting, and then you're essentially trying to track that blue line within the block. But is it solely based on compute units, or are you looking at the fees?
No, we're just looking at the compute units and we're deciding how fast to go. And it's the reason is so all the transactions we're receiving are going into the buffer, and the buffer is always ordered by how lucrative the transaction is. So if we're waiting, we're not just waiting, we're receiving new transactions and we're potentially reordering the buffer so that when we do go to execute, we'll have potentially even more lucrative transactions to execute first.
Right. That's the part I was missing. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So essentially, like the longer, I mean, in a way, I guess in a simplistic way, the longer you wait, you know, the more lucrative the transaction might be.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So here's kind of a little bit of a nicer one. So you can see we mostly didn't need to use 4 CPU cores here, and we know with 2 or 3 we were able to kind of get to the 50 million without a lot of struggle.
That's interesting. So I think doing a lot of processing in the back of my mind, but I don't think the questions are coming just yet. So I'll have to come back to this.
Yeah.
But no, I've heard you talk on the community validator calls too about looking for ways to optimize fees, and you know, now I'm starting to understand how that's how you're approaching it.
Yeah, and that team is really doing a lot of work here. We have a bunch of different modeling we're doing and like strategies we're kind of coming up with. Our goal is really for the validators running Firedancer to perform well and to make a lot of revenue, right? Revenue is probably the top line metric that we look at. So if there's a trade we have to take where the validator packs slightly less full blocks with lower compute units, but they made higher fee income. If you're a capitalist, you would say, well, that's better because the fee income is indicating, right, more utility being created for the users of the chain. So we'll take that choice.
More value passed through the chain. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we take that choice.
That's great. Yeah, that's super interesting.
There's one more UI I can show. We can go through it and then you can choose if you want to show it. It's a development UI. Oh, whoops, not that.
So the block progression that we just walked through, that's available today?
Yep, this is in v0.5. So if you run v0.5, you'll see this. Yeah, and so you should really be able to pretty well answer that compute units question, I think, if you're an operator. Now, on occasion, you'll see weird stuff in here. Sometimes your compute units are really low. Every now and then you might see a 20 million block. And in that case, usually what's happened is the Agave execution system we're using has like frozen up for a little bit. Like they've taken a lock or a page fault or something, and that's caused all the execution to halt for like a few hundred millis. Usually that's the cause of if you do see a really small block, but it's quite rare, maybe one every 5,000-10,000. Okay, so if we cut over to this development version of the UI, this is actually pointed at the same validator as we were looking at before, the DNVZ, but it's in development version of the GUI, so this isn't available publicly yet. But if we look at one of these slots, you'll see there's kind of this slot progression that we were showing before.
Yep.
Here we've hit 50 million, but there's this other interface here. This is actually a view into every single transaction that potentially went into the block.
Wow.
So we have all the transactions that were from bundles. I think, again, there's some Jito issue right now, so we may not be getting a lot of bundles. We can try a different slot to see that. It is kind of useful information. Oh, here we go. So this one has bundles. So here you can see we've received a bunch of transactions from Jito here.
Yep.
So you can really just start to filter this view to see all the transactions in the block. So we can view just ones from bundles, right? Just ones that were not from bundles, or everything. We can view transactions that didn't land. So these are transactions that didn't make it into the block for whatever reason. We can view votes. This needs to be renamed. So here, because this was the first slot in our rotation, you'll see no one was able to vote till about 150 millis in. Yeah, if we're looking at just these things that didn't land, you could be like, well, why did things not land? And you can highlight some of the errors that are common. A transaction was already processed is a really common one. Or the block hash was not found. This means the transaction was really old. So here we're highlighting the different reasons that a transaction might not have landed. Insufficient funds for rent means they couldn't pay rent, I suppose. Commit canceled relates to bundles. This means another transaction, the bundle failed. So yeah, you can kind of start drilling into different parts of the block. One of the interesting things to do here is you can look at the fees and the tips. So we kind of were always seeing that a lot of the tips or fees come from like one or two transactions.
Yeah.
So we can actually kind of start to analyze where those are in these blocks. And here you can see this, we've added this little fee chart. So this is showing from each bank CPU core. This is bank CPU core 0 and what it did. This is bank CPU core 1. So you can also see, okay, we didn't turn bank CPU core 1 on until pretty late. Bank CPU core 2, CPU core 3.
Yeah.
It was only one of these transactions that paid a really high fee was kind of right here, and we can zoom in and try and look at what that was. So there was this transaction here on bank 4. Actually took quite a while to execute, and it failed with an instruction error. This was a priority fee, so they actually still had to pay it. So we're still tidying up some of the GUI here, and we'll add a bit more information like the signature, so you can go figure out what this transaction was. But yeah, this is really kind of cool in how we're looking at things. So the other part of this that's nice is
what's on the top? So
oh yeah, so you can
if you go back,
no,
where you were looking at those white lines.
Oh yeah. So this you can zoom in to arbitrary detail of the transaction. So here we're zoomed out. This is showing all the 400 milliseconds.
Yeah.
Bank 0, 1, 2, 3. We can zoom into any portion of the block. And here, probably what I would zoom in on is like, let's find somewhere where we don't seem to be doing much. Probably here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, why is our CUs growing so slowly there? We can kind of really just keep drilling in and drilling in. You can see what these banks are doing. So these are actually votes. So votes are kind of annoying to execute because they take almost no time, but the scheduler has to like keep redispatching them.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of overhead to votes. And what you're seeing is like each one of these boxes is a single vote that's getting landed. So there's a preloading stage, a loading stage. This is kind of where we're loading the account that's the fee payer for the vote. Here we actually execute the vote instruction. And here there's completion, which is kind of bookkeeping on the accounts database and some other parts of the system internals once we've completed execution. So it's not that interesting to look at the votes, but one thing you can do is you can go and find a really expensive transaction. Here is one, like why this took forever, I don't know. So here's a transaction that took a really, really long time to load the data from the accounts database. And as developers, we would be curious, to figure out why. So this is really starting to help us kind of drill into the bottlenecks and the latency of the system overall.
And when you toggle the fees and the tips, that's when you were seeing essentially like those white lines. Yeah. So here, if you look at the very bottom where that, I guess the tallest white line is.
So these are kind of heat maps of where the fees and the tips came from in the block. So if we just do fees to start, it's showing like these are kind of normalized bars of the fee for each transaction. So you can see like almost the entire fees is coming from 3 transactions that really arrive at the same time. So these might have been 3 traders competing for an arbitrage. One was on bank 4, one was on bank 3, one was on bank 2, and it lines up with this chart here. See how the priority fee just shoots way up?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's kind of the heat map of where the fees are coming from. We can do the same thing with the tips. Pretty much all the tips came from this one transaction here, which again, you can kind of see this thing paid a lot and everything else was kind of smeared like peanut butter throughout the slot. There were these 2 other outliers as well. So just kind of giving you a sense of the block building, like the challenges that go into it, the level of understanding we're building about this system so we can really like tune it and make the validators the best decisions and the best revenue.
It really goes almost 3-4 levels deep at this point. All the way down to the transaction. It's pretty great.
Right. Yeah, and this is like running, real-time live, like we're streaming transactions straight out of our scheduling and execution system, loading them up in this front end. Here you can see the amount of compute units in the transactions, similar kind of thing. Compute units requested, income per CU, which is kind of a measure of how lucrative the transaction was. So you can see the most lucrative ones here ended up kind of being at the beginning.
And none of this is yet putting enough load on the validator itself to cause any type of performance conflict.
No, well, and one other reason I kind of wanted to build this GUI is to show the capacity of the system, right?
Yeah.
Firedancer and Firedancer were inherently limited by the constraints of the chain at the moment, which is the compute unit limit, right? It's there. I mean, Agave is not as fast yet, so the chain is still limited in terms of compute units while they're catching up. And so you look at like our system that we've built, and you might say, oh, well, you're not really packing any bigger blocks than Agave, right? Agave is just as fast, would be like a typical thing we hear. And I want to really highlight with this, like, well, they're just as fast because of these limits that are placed on the chain. But our system is sitting here so idle that it's basically doing nothing. I mean, we're so over provisioned that you could 100x, the amount of transactions coming. You could 100x the CU limits, and we would be completely unbothered, right? Our verification cores are doing nothing. Our deduplication doing nothing. Resolve nothing. Pack 50%, but this doesn't really change as you scale up the transactions. It's actually scales on a different value. Banks, we can scale this to any number of CPU cores, and currently we barely even use 1. I mean, we would not use 2 CPU cores in total to execute this entire block if we just ran them the whole time. And so, we have systems with 192 CPU cores available. We can put almost all of them on execution. We could be doing, hundreds of millions, billions of compute units. POH doesn't need to change this, and then Shred, I mean, we're, again, idle. Block store, we're idle. So I really like part of the GUI is to just highlight, look, like this is all flat. This system is unbothered. You can trust it. If there's a volume spike and the amount of transactions coming into the network goes through the roof, we're really ready to handle it. The system is going to perform fine. It's not going to fall over, right? So this is
there's still a lot of room to run.
Yeah, and we know this, but we also want to build trust and have like the users believe that. And so by really giving you this detailed look and like showing you, how constrained things are, I think really helps to build that trust too.
Yeah, no, this is really fantastic. I mean, really fantastic. It's just the level of detail is really unparalleled in systems like this. And not only is it really nice to look at, it's super useful.